Hey folks, Jeff here. Another opinion piece today. This time I'm going to dive into the future of WoW and maybe beyond that. So the World of Warcraft ecosystem has grown incredibly complex over the years. We've had numerous expansions and classic versions and other offshoots that have sort of splintered the player base and created this confusing landscape. In this video, I'm going to propose a clear and I think cohesive way to organize WoW moving forward and also address the question, should we get a WoW 2 or why haven't we? And of course, this is all from the perspective of a 30-year Blizzard gamer and a 20-year WoW player. So the World of Warcraft launched in November 2004 with great success. It was updated via expansion, The Burning Chaos, in January 2007, and then again in November 2008 with Wrath of the Lich King, and yet again in December 2010 with Cataclysm. And then many more times since, up through the upcoming 10th expansion, which is due in late 2024. And then there's an announced 11th and 12th expansions likely out in 2026 and 2028. The late 2010 expansion Cataclysm began this series of fundamental changes to the original game that occurred mostly with that expansion, but also with the next 2 or 3 expansions beyond that. The world was redone or replaced, partially so they could add flying, but it was also based off the story with Deathwing coming in, and they were going to rework old areas instead of introducing a new continent like they did in the previous 2 expansions. So what that meant is the entire world map was redone. All the original landscapes were reworked. The majority of quests were completely reworked or replaced entirely. There was a new talent system added instead of having simple additions to the talents that was done in prior expansions. That was all completely redone. There was an achievement system added alongside a transmog system that allowed you to change your look because, gone were the days where everyone knew the looks of high-level gear and could tell what you'd have achieved by looking at your character. Easier ways to connect were added, like the LFG system or dungeon finders and cross-realm zones. Entirely new game modes were added, like pet battles and garrisons with a whole offline followers game type. Player models were completely updated, which drastically upgraded the textures and the look and realism of our characters. And, on one side you had hero classes added, the Death Knight and Demon Hunter, that were supposed to be like this level above other classes. But on the other side, there seemed to be this push to like homogenize the classes so that, suddenly everybody had a stun or a CC and a lot of differentiation seemed to be gone. And like sidebar to that, there was at this time like a strong push for quality of life changes that were intended to just make the game easier or less tedious. So now you could find groups easily without the guild or social aspect. Gear was based on badges that everybody got and not these rare drops. Buffs were made much longer or done away with entirely. And these things were well intended, but they seem to circumvent the thing that I think makes WoW so enjoyable or so rewarding. It's 3 little words. It's sense of accomplishment, right? Things used to be hard, and I know this is like boomer speak, but they used to be hard and they took time and patience and perseverance. And yeah, there were some tedious tasks, but it felt good somehow. It was like rewarding when you got it all done. So all of these changes that I'm listing here were made, and I believe that they would have, in almost any other gaming situations, been the sequel. And so that's why I call all of this WoW 2. Cata through Legion and beyond, that's the true sequel. That's World of Warcraft 2. WoW 1 truly ended exactly where it should, with this amazing story build up through 4 continents, culminating in the defeat of, arguably probably the most notorious villain with the coolest story arc, and that was Arthas that had been introduced way back in the Warcraft series. So it was a perfect end to the game, and it truly felt like the same game throughout. Cata and Beyond just felt like and looked like a completely different game. And by the way, according to most sources, the end of Wrath of the Lich King, or my WoW 1 here, is when the game truly peaked from a subscription or financial success standpoint. Now, many of these things that I'm calling WoW 2 were well intended and well received at the time, myself included. I loved playing Cata and I had a lot of fun. But there was one glaring problem that we all kind of overlooked, Blizzard included. And I'll show my age one more time since you can tell I like going down memory lane. In 1988, I was really into Nintendo. I could not wait for Super Mario Bros. 2 to come out after staring at this magazine constantly all summer long. And I got it at Toys R Us on day 1, and it was awesome. It was great. I really liked the game. But pretty quickly, I came to the realization that, the original was just better. And I would still go back and play that game often. Well, imagine if Super Mario Bros. 2 had deleted and replaced Super Mario Bros. 1. And that's what WoW 2 which again I define as Cata through Legion and beyond, did to the game. It deleted the game that we knew and loved. The original lands were gone, the quests were gone, the way our characters worked and looked were gone. And so that void really pushed forward the era of private servers and this outcry for Classic that Blizzard was initially so closed off to.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
Well, thankfully, and to their credit, Blizzard had a huge mindset shift in the late 2010s, and they said, all right, we're going to start listening to the fans. We're going to give them what they asked for. So in 2019, Blizzard released WoW Classic. Let us play the game the way it was originally with the 1 to 60 content. This new Classic version was then expanded itself to TBC and then again to Wrath of the Lich King, and the cycle sort of started over. And by the way, it's not my main point here, but now we've just updated Classic to Cataclysm, which seems like we're repeating the same mistakes of the past and again deleting the Classic world, at least for this set of characters that we've created in Classic. We've also had offshoots to the games in the shape of a hardcore mode, which has its self-found mode. We have other sort of specialty game modes like Season of Mastery and Season of Discovery, which both took the original Classic game and made sort of moderate changes. There's a little time walking offshoot of Mists of Pandaria, maybe sort of testing the waters to see if we want to eventually move to MOP Classic. And all of these many versions were done to cater to fan requests, which again is a good thing, but have now created this super confusing system of like disjointed WoW versions. Also, Blizzard seems to roll out these versions relatively quickly based on fan requests, but it seems like without much thought to the timeline that they will each evolve over or how they might complement or conflict with each other. And so you end up with situations like we're in right now where, they probably rushed phase 3 of Season of Discovery to get it out before Cata Classic, or maybe because phase 2 got stale quicker than they anticipated. And I don't think it was thought through or tested real well. And, incursions and weird gearing and cutoffs to content ruined it. And so Cata launches and they realize, okay, we got to get phase 4 of SOD right. And there's this big delay and players are now almost forgetting about SOD and they're in Cata, but interest seems to be maybe leveling off quickly. I don't know yet. So nobody knows what to play. So finally, I'll get to my point. How do we sort of fix this mess and create what I think is a sustainable plan for WoW in the long term? And what should Blizzard do beyond WoW? So I would organize WoW into a series of permanent and temporary servers. So for the permanent servers, first and foremost, you have to let modern WoW play out and then end. And by the way, when I say modern WoW, I'm referring to what everyone else calls retail. I don't know why we use the term retail. Again, like Boomer ranting and raving here, but retail was used for us to differentiate between Blizzard's offerings and private servers in the years before Classic. Everything Blizzard releases is retail, including Classic and everything else. The current version is modern WoW, and that's what it should be called to. Non-retail is Turtle WoW or anything outside of Blizzard's purview. So when I say modern WoW, I mean what everyone else refers to as retail. So you have the modern WoW servers, then you have the classic WoW permanent servers. Era, which we currently have, TBC, which we don't have and would likely have very limited demand for, I'm sure, but it should exist. Wrath of the Lich King, same thing. It's completely gone now. There's no way to play a level 80 Wrath of the Lich King talented character, pre-Cata character anywhere. And there should be. And then maybe or maybe not a Cata server. I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but depending on demand and the success of Cata Classic, you might have it. Other than that, we then stay with modern WoW beyond that. And then part 2, you have temporary servers. These are seasonal, or since we've already used that term, I'll call them cyclical servers that satisfy the demand for fresh. And by cyclical, I mean you would launch fresh content, and I'm just using an example here where I've started at the beginning of the year, but it might be better to launch in the middle of summer around August when these things are more successful. And I'll show it in terms of the week that would be the launch week going across 104 weeks or 2 years, and then the length of each sort of cycle here. So you'd launch original, classic, or what we call classic era at the beginning of the launch cycle. It would have 6 weeks of launch and leveling in MC and Ani. Then you'd have 3 weeks of BWL, 3 weeks of ZG. You'd have 6 weeks of AQ 20 and 40. And then you'd launch Nax, and that would play out the remaining 8 weeks of the first 6-month cycle of this cyclical server, at which point it would move over to TBC. You'd have another 6 weeks, then 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks, and 8 weeks to let the server sort of breathe and finish out after you'd introduced Sunwell Plateau. At the end of the first year, which this is 52 weeks in here, week 53 would launch with Wrath of the Lich King. And again, it's another 26-week cycle in that expansion. And then maybe or maybe not, depending on the success of Kata Classic now, you'd have a Kata version. I think maybe there's enough demand for it, maybe not. But that would play out a nice, neat 2-year cycle. And at that point, it would start over. And here's the crux of it. At any given time, while your character's in sort of this first 6-month phase of era, you can jump over to the permanent era server. If you'd like, you can simply transfer over for free. If you want to make a copy at any time before this server rolls to TBC, you can do so and move that over to era. Once it's launched to TBC, you're in the TBC phase, and you could move your character anytime you want over to or copy over to the TBC permanent server. If you don't do that, it rolls over to Wrath of the Lich King, and so on. And that's my idea for a perpetual 2-year cycle of launching fresh servers, which I think would just satisfy this demand for fresh. I believe players love the development of a new server. I think it's some of the best experience in the game, leveling alongside all other players with no one else that's high level yet in the server, seeing the economy and the auction house develop from scratch, the pursuit of each new dungeon clearing and each new raid getting completed for the first time, building out your own character's gear and professions. That's fun. It's why you constantly see folks asking for a fresh classic. So you've released this temporary server that is this rolling ball on a set schedule like that. And that's the vision for WoW. You might have a separate seasonal server every 18 months or so that plays out like Season of Discovery or Season of Mastery. The modern game will eventually remain however it's ended after the last Titan expansion, and this is the setup. So that's the idea for WoW. Where does Blizzard go from here? It's time for a new game using one of the greatest pieces of IP in all of, I think, modern culture. If you ask me, I'm far from the first person to suggest this, but I've envisioned what the intro trailer might be for a long time. Just imagine the possibilities. It's a WoW type game, but set against the backdrop of these 3 amazing races with all the characters and that rich lore. It's set in space, so there's many planets you could visit. We have the opportunity to introduce space travel. You could have your own ship. You could build in the things that work from EVE Online. You could add in what I always, as a Warcraft 3 player, thought they were going to add to WoW and never did, which is the use of a small army alongside your character, similar to the way the hero mechanism in Warcraft 3 worked, where you had your hero and you controlled the army, but now your hero is your main MMO character and you control a small army, their positioning and abilities alongside that character. So there's so much opportunity, but in my mind, it's time to organize WoW for the future, reach the finish line, and then move along. So, hey, you can tell I like WoW history. If you're interested in an explanation of my first few weeks in WoW, check out this video. And if you made it this far, I really appreciate you watching. Cheers, folks.